Hey guys, it's Dani. Today I will be telling you about the best Cattleyas to look for if you're a beginner. A frequent request that I have here on my channel is to recommend specific Cattleyas, Vandas, Oncidiums, and so on that are just so easy and so rewarding that even beginners can have a lot of chances of success with these orchids. And you know what? I think this is a great idea for a sort of mini series. So if you guys enjoy this video, do let me know and I will be sure to do this with other alliances as well. Because yes, as much as I love Cattleyas and as much as I think they're easy generally, there are some differences between them, and I do believe some are more rewarding and just easier with beginners due to the various reasons that I'm gonna talk about today. So with that said, don't forget to give this video a like if you do end up enjoying it. That lets me know that I should do more of these types of videos, and why not subscribe? I post 3 times a week. And with that said, let's get on with the first Cattleya type orchid, which I recommend full-heartedly. And it's actually this little girl over here. Now, before we start, let me remind you that down below in the description, I will share with you my easy tutorial on Cattleya orchids. Even if the orchids we're gonna talk about today are super easy and forgiving, there are a few things you should be aware of if you've never grown Cattleyas. And I do believe that tutorial will help you out and will give you the best chances of actually having success with your orchids. Alright, so my #1 recommendation, absolutely, is the Procatavola Golden Peacock. And if you guys are not new on my channel, you might notice that I have this one in bloom for the past 2 months or so. One of the best traits of this orchid is that it lasts in bloom quite a lot. Cattleya orchids are not known to be very long-lasting bloomers. Certainly nothing like a Phalaenopsis, which, let's face it, they're queens when it comes to longevity of their blooms. Cattleyas can last anywhere from 2 weeks up to a month. Very few Cattleyas can actually last you quite a few months, and this is one of them. Not to mention, have you seen that beautiful color? Orange is one of the not so common colors when it comes to the orchid world. Although, when you start to actively look for it, you'll find a lot of orange orchids, but typically with Phalaenopsis, which I'm assuming most of us started with, it's not a very common color. The orange this orchid has is such a bright and joyful color. Also, the lip is just slightly lighter in color and it creates a beautiful contrast. What is missing from this orchid is a fragrance, although this orchid can have a very slight fragrance during nighttime, which reminds me of Brassavolas, since she does have Brassavolas in her parentage, but it's nothing super noticeable in my opinion. Each flower spike can produce multiple blooms. As you can see, the blooms are not very big, but they're very charming and star-shaped, and it can also bloom multiple times a year. Actually, in my experience, if this orchid is treated properly and it has a normal and healthy pattern of growth without stress, it puts out new growths continuously, and all of these new growths will bloom. You can rest assured. There is no blooming season. As long as you have warm temperatures and bright light, she will bloom with each new pseudobulb. So if you want a bushy orchid, it's not a good idea to divide it. As you can see, it is also not a very huge orchid. It is rather slender, so you can let this orchid just do whatever it likes, create as many directions of growth as possible, and have as many blooms as possible. Now, being that this orchid does grow continuously and doesn't actually have a blooming season or a growth season such as some Cattleya species, this also means that in the case in which you might remain without roots, which can happen, you don't actually have to wait around for the growing season to get new growth and new roots. No. This orchid bounces back immediately and starts growing immediately, which is a great bonus, because the #1 issue that most beginners have, me included, is having a rootless orchid at the very wrong time. If the orchid is not in her growing season, it can wait an entire year for its growing season to start putting out some roots. And in some cases, it's just way too long for the orchid to survive. In this list, I do have other Cattleya orchids which do the very same thing, hence why they're on the list. So with the Golden Peacock, the orchid is on your side, it wants to thrive for you, and most often than not, it will do just fine, even with beginners. Next little kitty is one that is very similar to the Golden Peacock. This is the Sun Mei Gold. It is just as easy, but it looks slightly different. The flowers are not so orange, they're a rather golden yellow and are dotted with the most beautiful brown freckles you've ever seen. I love this orchid so much. First of all, because it looks so beautiful, and second, because it's just so forgiving. And mine currently is in bud, and just like the previous orchid, this one does not have a growing season or a blooming season. It has continuous growth. When the flowers are done, shortly after, a new pseudobulb starts to grow from the base, and if the orchid is not stressed, that pseudobulb will bloom, no matter the season. You can have multiple flowers on each flower spike. This one though doesn't last all that long for me, certainly not like the Golden Peacock, but I typically can get about a month, which is still a lot if I compare it to other Cattleya type orchids. This orchid does not have a fragrance, sadly yet again, but it doesn't tend to be a very large Cattleya. You can see it is not tall at all. It can spread a little bit on a horizontal level, but I find it to be quite a showy plant anyway. It takes the exact same care as any other typical Cattleya does. It enjoys bright light, warm temperatures, and of course, your love and attention. So definitely, I would look out for this one if you're a fan more of the goldeny yellow type of color, not necessarily the orange. And also, this one does have slightly bigger flowers. They're a little bit more meaty, if I can call it like that. And those freckles, oh my goodness, they are so charming. Next wonderful Cattleya orchid, which I do believe should not be missing from any serious collection, is the Potinara Burana Beauty. Now this one is slightly different from the previous one. It looks more like a Cattleya. It is a bifoliate Cattleya, which for me at the moment is just going out of bloom. But when it is in full bloom, it is one of the most magical times that an orchid lover could experience. The best thing about this orchid, in my opinion, is the fragrance. I have yet to encounter an orchid which smells identical to roses. And I guess you can say Miltoniopsis have a bit of a rosy scent to them. Yeah, well, this one has the damask rose scent, if you know what I'm talking about, or very close to it. It's such a beautiful, sweet and strong fragrance that even if this orchid actually resides outside on the terrace, when I'm around there, I can detect the fragrance, hands down. Mind you, if you're sensitive to fragrances, this is not the orchid for you. It is pretty powerful. And since this orchid is such an easy grower, has continuous growth, once again, which we like, it can actually develop into quite a specimen very fast. Mine has 3 directions of growth at the moment, and just like with the previous orchids, whenever a new growth matures, it will bloom no matter the season if the orchid is not stressed. And since this orchid can create 4 to 5 flowers per flower spike, you can imagine a whole bush can really fill up a room. The flowers are quite larger than the previous two and have more of a Cattleya shape, but this orchid is peloric or splash petal, in the sense that the petals do try to imitate the lip a little bit, and the colors, in my opinion, are not as vibrant as the other two, but they are really pretty. Now, this orchid does not grow as fast as the previous two. Not only do those have continuous growth, but also the pseudobulbs mature relatively fast, couple of months, 3 months. This one takes a little bit more than that. So I believe within a year you can have 2 to 3 flowerings from something like this. It will depend on your environment, of course. But yet again, you don't have to worry about when to repot it or if you have a rootless orchid, because it will create roots relatively fast compared to other orchids. I do notice that root growth happens pretty much throughout the year. There isn't a moment where this orchid grows more, not even in winter. For me, she's growing pretty much at the same rate all year round. And even though she does seem to enjoy warmth and bright light better, even in the winter, I cannot stop this orchid from growing. She will grow fast, she will develop fast. When I purchased it, she was 3 or 4 pseudobulbs, and that was about 2 years ago. And look at her now. This is how she looked like when I received it, and all of this grew into years. That is fast in Cattleya terms. So definitely, I recommend this orchid to any of you who love fragrance, but also for those of you who are convinced you're not gonna do well with a Cattleya. I think this one will change your mind. Alright, next Cattleya, I will admit, might not be very available all around the world. I hope it will be very soon because this one is absolutely worth it. This is Cattleya Lady in Red that I found in a flower shop last year, and it's the reddest Cattleya that I own. Doing a little bit of research, I found out this is actually a pretty old hybrid, so I'm guessing newer, more spectacular maybe hybrids took its place in the last few years, but I really do hope it will make a comeback. This is not a fragrant orchid, so if you're scent sensitive, this one is for you. And as I was saying, has the most beautiful red coloration I have ever seen on any orchid, really, at this point. I love the red on this Cattleya more than anything, more than the Nelly Eiler, and that says a lot. Plus, it looks exactly like my logo. The thing is, we designed the logo before I found this Cattleya, so I guess it was just meant to be. Now, sure, this orchid looks beautiful. It's worth having, but is it easy to grow? Absolutely. Just like the Burana Beauty, this orchid grows continuously. It does not have a rest, a bloom season, a growing season. It pretty much puts out new growth when the older flowers are spent. And this is where the previous flowers, which happened about 3 months ago, were. I'm also noticing that it is very willing to create multiple directions of growth. This particular direction split into two, as you can see here. I purchased this orchid with one direction. Last year it split into two directions. You can see this one wants to bloom now. And this year it has yet another direction from this side, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that it will create two directions from this side as well. So again, this one can transform into a little monster with good conditions. And the fact that it has continuous growth makes it very savable. And also, if you have to repot in the middle of summer, let's say, you can absolutely do so. You don't have to wait for the moment in which the root tips grow. So definitely an orchid to have. That color is pure magic. Look out for it in flower shops and garden centers here in Europe because, hey, if I found it, it's bound to appear somewhere in other flower shops as well. Also, why not just put it on the wish list and from time to time just search for it in orchid nurseries. I really hope it appears again. I think this is just one of those cases that all hybrids are eclipsed by the newer hybrids on the market, but I think this one deserves to be maintained. It is absolutely out of this world. Next up, and some of you might be surprised, this is the Diacattleya Chantilly Lace Twinkle. Now, this is not a very old orchid in my collection. I purchased it, I think, 2 years ago, but I've spent enough time with it to learn that this is a very vigorous orchid and one that is absolutely worth having. Now, I'll be honest, I did manage to set her back at some point a little bit. I wasn't the greatest parent, but she bounced back really fast. And I did discover that it's not one of those orchids that has blooming seasons or growing seasons. It grows pretty much continuously, but not as fast and not as abundant, let's say, as the other orchids that I talked about. That's why she's a little bit lower on the list. But the flowers of this orchid, oh my goodness, they look like no other Cattleya. First of all, the shape looks absolutely wonderful due to the very varied, I would say, parentage of this orchid. They're also peloric, and you can notice that if you look at the petals versus the lip, they look almost identical. And to make the package complete, yet again, it's one of the best smelling Cattleyas that I have. It smells like one of my favorite NoID orchids, which we call Princess Jacky. We're gonna get to that as well, actually, on this list. But with the bonus of coloration on the flowers, and actually a faster growth than the Princess Jacky. Also, I don't believe this orchid will grow very tall. Looking at pictures on the internet, I've actually never seen one that is super tall. So I think it can fit multiple types of growing displays. And yet again, it takes the exact same care as any other Cattleya. You should be fine with the basic Cattleya care. But of course, the less stress the orchid goes through, the more flowers you'll have, and the more often. Next Cattleya on my list is the Cattlianthe Rojo, and if you guys remember, we had it in bloom at the beginning of the year or in the springtime, but the pseudobulb which was in bloom was this one. Ever since then, which was 6 months ago maximum, she created an entire new pseudobulb and she's growing yet another one. You can see this one has a sheath. It may or may not bloom. It's a very new orchid for me, and also it was very set back. It was completely rootless. Lucky for me, I did have this orchid in the past and I did get to know her a little bit better, and I can tell you she's a super easy grower. Bonus, she is red, like the name suggests. It isn't a fragrant orchid, but it's one of those that can create a cluster of blooms. It also has continuous growth. I wouldn't say she is as prolific as the Golden Peacock. Individual flowers are not actually very big, but in greater numbers they do make for such a nice display. I find that this orchid grows pretty fast. It's not very tiny, as you can see. It can get quite tall, although I've seen worse than this, trust me. And the better care it receives, the better the blooms will be as well. It can actually create quite a lot of blooms. And flower spikes can also be quite tall. But the color is just so beautiful. The orchid is just so easy to grow that I do believe deserves a place on this list. Next orchid is one that just finished blooming, but fear not, I did actually film the blooms. And also it's not a new orchid and I do have previous footage. Glorious footage, because this is the BC Saint Andre, one of the most spectacular orchids that I have, simply due to the sheer size of the blooms. Even though I will give it not the most colorful in the world, that lip is fantastic. The thing is though, as the flower ages, maybe after a week or so after it opened, it gets very pale. So this one is a color changer, which some people really like. I really like it as well, although I do prefer the coloration when the flower opens. But this again can bloom multiple times a year. Now, I did discover that during winter time, she doesn't really bloom all that great for me and definitely does not grow as fast. But come spring and summer and even autumn, she continuously throws up new pseudobulbs, which in good conditions all bloom. And also, it's not the type of orchid that produces sheaths, so you don't have to wait around for something to develop in that sheath. Pretty much as the pseudobulb is not yet fully mature, you should be able to see buds. And when the pseudobulb is almost completely mature, and you can see mine, it's not really mature just yet. So very soon after you see the buds, you will also have the flowers. It develops really fast. And because it also grows really fast, you can have quite the specimen in a relatively short time. Bonus, it is fragrant. But it's only nighttime fragrant because it has a Brassavola in her parentage, and when it comes to scent, the traits are identical to the Brassavolas. It smells the same, behaves the same. In the daytime, there's no type of scent on this orchid, but in the nighttime, it's absolutely magical. And lastly, I will throw in a wild card. This is, I guess, my favorite Cattleya. This is the Princess Jacky, but that's just the name that we gave to it. It's actually a no ID, and I'm so afraid to put an actual ID on it. There are many hybrids that look very similar and smell great. The white bridal, the something with Yuki. There are a few hybrids which look very similar to it, and even species. This is a no ID Cattleya which appears in Europe in flower shops very frequently, and because she's a flower shop find, she does not have a proper tag. It is a pure white Cattleya, and even though the flowers might not tell you much, the fragrance, oh my goodness, I cannot even begin to describe how the fragrance is. If you have the Chantilly Lace Twinkle, it's almost identical to that, but it has more of a creamy texture. So the fragrance is lemony, citrusy, creamy, sweet, but also floral at the same time. There are many layers in this fragrance, and I am sure that a person who works in the perfume industry could do a better job describing the scent and detecting all of the layers. It is hands down a wonderful hybrid, which you should definitely keep an eye out for in flower shops. I've never seen it in nurseries, or if I did, I wouldn't know that it's this one because I don't have an ID for it. And if that wasn't enough, it's also a pretty easy grower. I will have to be honest, it's not as forgiving as the first Cattleyas that I talked about today, but it's also not as slow and delicate, let's say, as some species that I know of and that I don't possess anymore. I did set this one back and it staled for a little bit, but it never actually went to the point of being so set back that the canes were a few centimeters tall. No, it always pulled through, and I do believe it is suited for beginners as well if you have a little bit more patience with it, because the flowers are really worth it. And yeah, one of these days I will find out exactly what it is, because it's a little bit ridiculous to have a no ID as pretty much my favorite Cattleya. But on that bombshell, I will let you know that many hybrids you can find in flower shops are actually easy to grow. And I do have a few of them, but I think for today this is enough, and considering the number of Cattleya varieties that there are on the market and that I have, I'm sure there will be other parts to this video. I have no doubt about that, but for now, this has to be it, and I hope this gave you some ideas of the Cattleyas you can look out for if you want to start collecting them. As I was saying, I think there are much more than this which are absolutely worth it, even if they don't bloom as often as these guys. I guess those will be the subject of a different video, and as always, I do invite you to let us know in a comment down below if you have other recommendations of super easy, super fast growing Cattleyas which you think are worth mentioning. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!